No smile, pure clinical observation. Right now, as you listen to my voice, someone in your life is running a diagnostic script on you. They aren't doing it out of love. They are doing it out of a desperate, subconscious need for control. For months, maybe even years, you have been their predictable data point. You were the one who texted back within 90 seconds. You were the one whose pupils dilated when they walked into the room. You were the asset they assumed would always be in their emotional portfolio. But 48 hours ago, something shifted. You stopped chasing. You think they haven't noticed? Let me explain how the human brain actually processes power. The second you withdrew your attention, you didn't just hurt their feelings, you broke their psychological matrix. You see, their brain had mapped your submissive behavior as a permanent baseline. When you went silent, that baseline flatlined. To a person with narcissistic or highly avoidant tendencies, that silence doesn't feel like peace. It feels like an existential threat to their perceived status. In the next 10 minutes, I'm going to expose the exact, hidden sequence of behaviors this person is about to launch against you. This isn't guesswork. This is advanced behavioral profiling. They are currently moving through a three-phase panic loop designed specifically to pull you back into compliance. If you do not know what these phases look like, you will fall for the very first trap they set tomorrow morning. You will mistake their calculated panic for genuine affection, and the moment you step back into their cage, they will punish you twice as hard for leaving. But if you stay tuned until the very end of this video, you will possess an unfair psychological advantage. You will know exactly what text message they are typing right now, why they are tracking your social media footprints, and the precise verbal deadbolt you need to use to lock them out of your psyche forever. This is urgent. The countdown on their reaction has already begun. Let's look at the data. When a target realizes they have lost leverage over you, their first instinct isn't to run to your door, it is to freeze. This is called the bluff of indifference. Their brain is executing a risk assessment. They are asking themselves, is this a temporary glitch, or has the asset completely checked out? To test this, they will intentionally withhold attention. They might post a hyper-curated photo online to signal how perfectly fine they are. They are fishing for a micro-reaction from you. They want you to view the story, like the post, or send the "Are you okay?" text. If you understand behavioral profiling, you know that extreme performance of happiness is actually a loud indicator of internal panic. They are watching your response like a hawk watches a field mouse. The moment you give them absolutely nothing to look at, their system experiences an acute spike in cortisol. When the tactical freeze fails, they move immediately to phase 2, the manufactured emergency. Because they can no longer access your energy through normal channels, they will create a scenario that forces a response. You will receive a text message that seems completely accidental, or an urgent question about a trivial item you left behind. "Hey, did you happen to keep that old receipt? I just saw something that reminded me of you. Hope you're alive." Notice the language mechanics here. It is designed to bypass your defense mechanisms by appearing low stakes or high urgency. In behavioral analysis, we call this an anchoring exploit. They are trying to anchor your focus back onto them. If they are hyper-avoidant, they might even orchestrate a minor crisis in their own life, hoping your natural empathy will force you to break your silence. Do not move. Do not flinch. Any response, even a negative one, tells them their operational strategy still works. If you survive the freeze and the emergency, you will witness the most dangerous phase of all, the chameleon re-entry. This is where they completely shift their behavioral profile to match exactly what you've been begging for. If you wanted them to be vulnerable, they will suddenly drop a wall of text confessing their deepest flaws. If you wanted them to be attentive, they will shower you with validation. But look closely at the micro-expressions and the cadence of their speech if you see them in person. Is their voice flat despite the emotional words? Are their gestures forced and theatrical? A person returning out of genuine growth takes time and shows deep humility. A person returning out of a panic for control operates with an intense, rushed urgency. They need a hit of validation, and they need it before their ego starves. Here is your operational blueprint moving forward. When you stop chasing, you win the psychological high ground. Do not surrender it for a cheap, temporary display of affection. They do not miss you yet. They miss the version of themselves that felt powerful when they looked at you. The next time they reach out with their manufactured chaos, your response must be absolute, unreadable neutrality. If you must respond, use closed, low-energy syntax, short sentences, no exclamation points, no emotional adjectives. Treat them with the same polite, distant compliance you would give a stranger asking for directions at a bus stop. When you become entirely unreadable, you become entirely untamable. Stop chasing, stay detached, and watch the matrix they built around you completely dissolve. The core of this dynamic relies entirely on what behavioral profilers call predictive processing. The human brain is essentially a highly advanced organic prediction engine. Every single day, it monitors environments, tracks patterns, and builds cognitive maps of everyone within its radius to conserve energy and maintain a sense of safety. When someone interacts with you over an extended period, their brain successfully maps out your baseline behavior. They know precisely how much emotional currency you are willing to spend on them. They recognize the exact cadence of your text responses, the lingering look of validation in your eyes, and the predictable way you compromise your own boundaries just to keep them comfortable. To their subconscious mind, you are no longer a variable. You are a fixed, guaranteed asset. Because your submissive or chasing behavior is so entirely predictable, it creates a massive psychological asymmetry. They get to occupy the position of high status, moving through the relationship with complete behavioral liberty, while you occupy the lower status position, constantly expending caloric energy to chase after their fluctuating attention. The very millisecond you choose to drop your hands and stop chasing, you don't just surprise them, you violently disrupt their neural architecture. The predictive brain cannot handle a sudden, unexplained void where a guaranteed pattern used to be. When the daily or weekly hits of validation you used to provide completely vanish, their brain interprets this lack of data as an immediate crisis. This triggers an acute state of status anxiety. In human social hierarchies, there is nothing more terrifying to a fragile ego than the sudden, silent loss of authority over a subordinate asset. They don't register your silence as a healthy boundary. They register it as a direct threat to their perceived value. The internal narrative they built about their own superiority, the comfortable story that they are the prize and you are the pursuer, instantly begins to crumble. Because the human mind abhors a vacuum, their thoughts will obsessively loop around one single question. What changed? This disruption fundamentally flips the power dynamic because it forces them out of passive consumption and into hyper-vigilant observation. Previously, they had the luxury of ignoring you or taking you for granted because your availability was guaranteed. Now, because you have become completely unavailable and unreadable, they are forced to expend their own cognitive energy to figure you out. They enter a state of high-alert scanning, trying to read into your silence, analyzing your lack of digital footprints, and desperately searching for any microscopic sign that they still hold sway over your emotions. By refusing to comply with the old pattern, you have effectively stripped away their psychological leverage. They are no longer the ones sitting back and evaluating your worth. They are suddenly the ones being forced to adapt to your absolute non-compliance. This asymmetry is incredibly jarring for someone who relies on control, causing an internal panic that drives them to make impulsive, sloppy behavioral moves just to re-verify that they still possess the power to make you move. To truly understand how this person operates, you have to dissect the hidden architecture of what behavioral scientists call a behavioral baseline. A baseline is the standard, predictable set of actions, response times, and emotional investments that a person displays under normal, unstressed conditions. For the entire duration of your relationship, this individual has carefully established a highly specific baseline for you. They calibrated exactly how much neglect you would tolerate before you started begging for crumbs, exactly how long they could leave you on red before you sent a follow-up message, and exactly what kind of casual disrespect you would rationalize away just to keep the peace. In their psychological framework, your chasing behavior wasn't just an action, it was the structural floor they stood on to feel superior. They heavily relied on this baseline because it allowed them to regulate their own fragile self-worth without ever having to invest anything meaningful back into you. Your constant, predictable pursuit acted as a reliable emotional utility bill that you paid every single month, keeping the lights on in their ego. The absolute moment you completely remove your energy and cut off that supply, you aren't just taking a break, you are creating a massive, terrifying psychological vacuum. Human psychology operates on homeostatic principles, meaning the mind desperately seeks to maintain its familiar balance, even if that balance is toxic or manipulative. When you suddenly flatline your output, the predictable baseline they relied on is completely shattered. This sudden drop in attention forces their brain into a state of acute deprivation. Because they were entirely accustomed to consuming your time, your focus, and your validation on demand, the abrupt absence of those things triggers a powerful neurological withdrawal. The brain regions associated with reward and habit processing suddenly begin firing in distress because a deeply ingrained pattern has been broken without their permission. This is precisely where the involuntary obsession loop takes root in their subconscious mind. When a pattern is broken, the human brain cannot simply let it go. It becomes hyper-focused on fixing the anomaly. They will find themselves utterly unable to stop thinking about you. Not because they have suddenly realized they love you, but because their internal system cannot tolerate the unmapped territory of your silence. They will obsessively open your chat window, check your last seen status, review old messages, and scan your social media updates, searching for a single scrap of data to explain why the machine stopped working. Every hour that passes without you reaching out increases the pressure inside this cognitive loop. The thought of you, which used to be a passive, casual background file in their mind, suddenly overrides all other mental processes, forcing them into a state of hyperfixation. They are trapped in a loop of their own making, driven crazy by the fact that the person they assumed would always be running after them has suddenly turned around, walked away, and left them standing entirely alone in the quiet dark of their own empty ego. When you finally cut off the emotional supply, the person who once held power over you will inevitably descend into a highly predictable three-stage behavioral cycle. Human nature under psychological stress is remarkably mechanical, and because their ego is facing a sudden threat, they will follow a diagnostic script whether they realize it or not. The very first phase they execute is the calculated indifference, which is essentially the ultimate bluff. In this stage, their primary objective is to make you believe that your absence has zero impact on their life. They will intentionally double down on their baseline behaviors, making a loud, theatrical show of how completely unbothered, thriving, and highly occupied they are. On a digital level, this translates to an immediate surge in strategic social media posts, curated photos with friends, subtle hints of new romantic interests, or ambiguous captions meant to trigger your insecurity. This is a carefully calibrated psychological trap designed to exploit your fear of being forgotten, aiming to panic you into breaking your silence first to check if they still care. When your absolute non-compliance breaks their bluff and days or weeks pass with zero reaction from your side, their system enters a state of deep cognitive dissonance, forcing them to pivot instantly into phase 2, which is artificial urgency. At this exact junction, the casual facade completely drops because their brain realizes the old tricks are no longer yielding data. To force an immediate opening in your psychological perimeter, they will manufacture a low-stakes crisis or a highly specific excuse that demands a rapid response. This often takes the form of an accidental text message that was allegedly meant for someone else, a sudden and highly urgent question about a completely trivial object you left behind months ago, or a vague, manipulative check-in disguised as deep, selfless concern for your well-being. The phrasing in this phase is highly weaponized because it is mathematically engineered to bypass your logic and play directly on your natural empathy, guilt, or basic politeness, hoping that you will give them just enough of a sliver of communication to let them know they still hold real estate in your mind. If you maintain your stoic, unreadable silence through the artificial urgency, you will push them directly into the final and most chaotic stage, which is localized panic. This is the exact moment the realization completely sets in that they have genuinely lost all psychological leverage, causing their underlying emotional instability to bleed through the surface. In this phase, their behaviors will fluctuate wildly and rapidly between extreme, over-the-top love bombing and sudden toxic bursts of vindictive anger. One day they might send you a massive, deeply vulnerable wall of text, confessing all of their flaws, apologizing for past behaviors, and promising the exact future you always begged for, only to follow it up 12 hours later with bitter insults, accusations of coldness, or threats to block you forever if you do not respond. This erratic oscillation is a clear, loud indicator that their cognitive emotional control has completely fractured under the weight of the vacuum you created, leaving them entirely desperate to get any reaction out of you, whether it is love or pure hatred, just to prove to themselves that they still possess the ultimate power to make you move. When this person inevitably resurfaces to test your boundaries, the entire interaction becomes a master class in leakage, the psychological phenomenon where internal panic and deception bleed through a person's outer defense mechanisms. No matter how perfectly they script their words, the human autonomic nervous system cannot be entirely controlled, and their sudden loss of power will manifest in clear micro-expressions and glaring body language anomalies. The moment they sit across from you, or appear on a video screen, their primary objective is to project an aura of absolute casualness and effortless superiority. However, because their underlying cognitive load is incredibly high from trying to read your unmoving baseline, this performance will always feel slightly uncanny and overcompensated. You will notice a hyper-controlled posture that looks rigid rather than relaxed, or an unnatural stiffness in their shoulders as they try to force an image of calm composure. They might use grand, sweeping gestures that feel slightly delayed or entirely out of sync with the actual emotional weight of the words they are speaking, a telltale sign that their movements are being consciously manufactured rather than naturally felt. If you observe their face with a clinical, detached eye, you will catch the fleeting micro-expressions that flash across their features before their conscious mind can suppress them. Look for the micro-flash of contempt or a sudden downturn of the mouth the exact second you deliver a short, polite, neutral response that gives them zero emotional data to work with. Watch their eyes with absolute precision. When someone realizes they no longer control the dynamic, their body experiences a subtle fight-or-flight response, causing an involuntary surge of adrenaline. This physiological spike leads to immediate pupil dilation, a symptom they cannot hide even in a brightly lit room, as their brain tries to visually take in more of the environment to assess the sudden threat to their ego. You will also notice a highly irregular blink rate, either an intense, unblinking stare meant to intimidate you into compliance, or a rapid, fluttering blink that indicates deep internal stress and cognitive friction as they realize their standard manipulation tactics are completely failing in real time. Furthermore, their verbal mechanics will heavily betray their hidden agenda through a concept known as linguistic overcompensation. Because they are terrified of appearing desperate or defeated, they will fill the silence with an excessive amount of unnecessary details, over-explaining why they reached out, or fabricating elaborate stories about how incredibly busy and successful they have been since you stopped chasing. They will use vocal qualifiers to artificially bolster their credibility, dropping phrases like honestly, to be perfectly frank, or transparently, far more frequently than a comfortable, secure person ever would. Pay close attention to the pitch of their voice. As the psychological pressure mounts and you refuse to mirror their energy, the tension will constrict their vocal cords, causing their pitch to slightly spike or crack during moments where they try to assert dominance. They might also try to use forced touch, such as a highly deliberate tap on the shoulder or an overly familiar nudge, trying to use physical proximity to forcefully trigger your old submissive neural pathways and verify if your body still reacts to their presence. By identifying these physiological tells, you effectively strip away the illusion of their control, seeing right through the polished facade to the frantic, sweating operator behind the curtain. Maintaining this position requires you to establish what behavioral architects call absolute noncompliance. When you decide to draw a strategic red line in your mind, you are choosing to completely step outside of the game they are playing. To do this successfully, you must understand that your silence or your coldness isn't a weapon to hurt them or a petty tactic to make them chase you back. It is a permanent geographical boundary. The second you view your detachment as a game to win them over, you have already lost, because your cognitive energy is still entirely anchored to their reactions. True non-compliance means you become a completely neutral gray stone. It means that when their name flashes on your phone screen, your resting heart rate does not change by a single beat, because you have already categorized them as a defunct, broken system that no longer has any jurisdiction over your emotional life. You must mentally lock this red line into place, knowing that they will throw everything they have against it, testing it for cracks, weakness, or any small sign of sentimental leakage. To survive the intense psychological pressure of their hoovering attempts, you must equip your mind with advanced cognitive tools designed to neutralize emotional manipulation. The most powerful tool in your possession is the absolute refusal to match or mirror their emotional velocity. When they approach you with a high-energy display of either intense love bombing or explosive anger, your natural human instinct is to match that frequency. You must consciously override this biological hardwiring. If you are forced to speak to them, you must intentionally slow down the cadence of your speech, lower your vocal pitch, and respond with dead, flat neutrality. Use incredibly short, closed-ended sentences that offer zero conversational footholds. If they ask you an invasive, emotionally loaded question, a simple, polite, yet entirely hollow response like, "I appreciate your perspective," or "That is interesting," completely starves their ego of the conflict or validation it desperately requires to survive. You are essentially offering them a completely smooth, vertical glass wall. No matter how hard they try to climb it or find a grip to pull you into an argument, they simply slip off and hit the ground. By holding this line with unshakable discipline, you completely rewrite your own neural pathways, permanently breaking the trauma bond that kept you submissive for so long. Every single time you successfully ignore a baiting text message, every time you look right through an overcompensated micro-expression without flinching, and every time you choose your own peace over their manufactured chaos, you are reclaiming a massive piece of your personal sovereignty. You are proving to your own subconscious mind that you are no longer an asset to be managed, but a completely sovereign territory. This level of stoic detachment is the ultimate form of psychological dominance because it cannot be argued with, it cannot be manipulated, and it cannot be broken down by charm or anger. When they finally realize that their entire toolkit of manipulation is completely useless against your absolute non-compliance,